Okay, so let us start a new discussion, the place of supply. Till now we have covered three main headings of GST laws: levy and collection of GST, registration under GST laws, and supply. These three are 100% over, and you can attempt any theory or any numerical of these topics if you have attended the lectures regularly. Now I am starting a new concept, place of supply. Now before starting the new concept, place of supply, do you know the relevance of place of supply? When we discussed the topic nature of supply, which was our last topic, nature of supply, there can be two types of supplies. Not types, I should not use the word types. As far as nature of supply is concerned, it can be interstate or intrastate. Within inter and intra, if you remember, there were three sections involved in nature of supply: section 7 of IGST, section 8 of IGST, and section 9 of IGST Act. Section 7 of IGST Act talks about interstate supply. Section 8 of IGST Act talks about intrastate supply. Within section 7 of IGST Act, interstate supply, there were 5 subsections: section 7, subsection 1, 7.2, 7.3, 7.4, 7.5. 7.1 and 2 talks about goods, 7.3 and 4 talks about services, and 7.5 talks about goods as well as services. So I am discussing section 7 of IGST right now. Within goods of 7.1 and 7.2, 7.1 talks about domestic supply of goods and 7.2 talks about international supply of goods. When you do import, that is why similarly, or you can say similarly, in 7.3 and 7.4 there were services involved. 7.3 talks about domestic supply of services and 7.4 talks about international supply of services. Now, how do you check? Can you tell me how can you check whether any supply is interstate or intrastate? Any answer from your side? I have simply given you some hints also through these sections. How do you check whether any supply of goods or services is inter or intra? Suppose I will sell 5 laptops. I am a businessman in Delhi and I am selling 5 laptops to a person who is in Tamil Nadu. I am selling 5 laptops as a businessman in Delhi. I am selling 5 laptops to a person who is in Tamil Nadu. Can you tell me whether it is interstate supply or intrastate supply? Anyone who can tell me? Is it interstate or intrastate? As a businessman, I am selling 5 laptops from Delhi to Tamil Nadu. Which supply is this? Can you tell me whether it is interstate or intrastate? Because any supply can either be inter or intra. There is no third supply. So either it will be inter or intra. Now, which supply is this in this example? What is your answer? Mansi, what is the answer?
Sir, I think interstate.
How can you say this?
Sir, location of supplier is Delhi and you are supplying in Tamil Nadu, so interstate.
No, the reason is wrong. Supply may be interstate, but the reason is wrong. How can you say that the place of supply is Tamil Nadu? Just because I am selling the goods in Tamil Nadu, it doesn't mean that the place of supply is Tamil Nadu. Point clear?
Yes, sir.
I need to read the provision. Now, any other answer? Any other answer? But one thing is very good, what you have told me, is that you remember the concept that location of supplier and place of supply are required. That is a great thing. That you remember this concept that you need location of supplier and place of supply. This, if you remember this one, that means your interstate and intrastate concept is clear. So this is a good point. That you remember at least that location of supply and place of supply, these two things will tell me whether any supply is interstate or intrastate. Do you all remember this point? That location of supply and place of supply helps me in telling whether the supply is inter or intra. Please raise your hand if you know this word. Okay. Now another example. I have purchased 5 laptops from Germany. I am in India. I imported 5 laptops from Germany. I imported 5 laptops from Germany. Mansi, in this case, which supply is this? I imported 5 laptops from Germany and I am in Delhi. Which supply is this?
Sir, I'm not sure.
Okay, any other answer from anyone? As a person in Delhi, I have imported 5 laptops from Germany. Now, which supply is this? Interstate or intrastate?
Sir, it is interesting because the location of supply and the place of supply are in different things.
No, the answer is wrong. I never check location of supply and place of supply when it comes to international supply. If you remember section 7 of the IGST Act, in case of domestic supply only I need to check what is the location of supply and place of supply. When you import by default under section 7 subsection 2, which we have already covered, the supply is treated as interstate. Please raise your hand if the concept is clear. I check the concept of location and supply and place of supply only when everything is happening within the boundaries of our country. The moment you cross the boundaries of our country, whether through export or import, by default the supplies are interstate and I do not check what is the location of supply and what is the place of supply. By default these are interstate. So this is the first relevance of place of supply. Until and unless you know what is the place of supply, when it is domestic supply, you do not know which supply is this, inter or intra. This is my first relevance. Please raise your hand if you go to know this first relevance of place of supply. This is one of the most important concerns because without place of supply, you will never determine, you will not be in a position to determine that in domestic supply, the supply is inter or intra. Please raise your hand if you have understood the first relevance of place of supply concept. Now, what is the second relevance now? Can anyone tell me the second relevance of place of supply? Can you think that what is the second relevance of place of supply? It will help me in telling me another most important thing. Can anyone judge that what is the second relevance of place of supply? Can you try to judge what is the second relevance of place of supply? Anyone who can make an attempt? What is the second relevance of place of supply? Second relevance of place of supply, it tells which state will earn the revenue. Like in my example, when I sold 5 laptops from Delhi to Tamil Nadu, if my place of supply, if let us suppose that my place of supply is Tamil Nadu, then it tells that Tamil Nadu government will get the revenue and not the Delhi government. This is the second relevance. That place of supply not only determines that any supply is interstate or intrastate when it is domestic, it also tells me that if it is there, it also helps me in determining which state will get the revenue. Now, have you understood the second relevance also? That it helps me in telling which state will earn the revenue. The place of supply will tell me which state will receive the revenue also on any transaction. Please raise your hand if the concept is clear. So I have told you two relevances of place of supply. Now let me discuss this, let me tell you this discussion through my notepad. So let me share my notepad and then see what we have covered. Now, before discussing place of supply, you must know the topic of nature of supply, which we have already covered. And in nature of supply, you remember there were three sections: section 7, 8, and 9 of the IGST Act. 7 was dealing with interstate supplies, 8 was dealing with intrastate supply, and 9 was dealing in territorial waters. Within intra, there were 5 subsections, if you remember: 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, 7.4, and 7.5. In intra, 8.1. In section 8, 8.1 and 8.2. 7.1 and 7.2 were related to goods. 3 and 4 were related to services. And these were related to goods as well as services. Within goods, if you remember, 7.1 was domestic supply of goods, and 7.2 was international supply. International supply means every import is by default interstate. That is why I am saying that when you talk about imports, you do not check location of supply and place of supply. There is no need to check. By default, it tells me that it is interstate, and if it is interstate, IGST is applicable on every import. But in domestic supply of goods, do you remember the line of 7.1? I don't know whether you remember it or not, but there was a line. The starting of section 7, subsection 1 is subject to the provisions of section 10. This is what the language is: subject to the provisions of section 10, where the location of supplier and place of supply are in different states, different UTs, or one state and one UT. Then the supply is by default interstate. And why I'm saying that? The place of supply helps in achieving two purposes. First, it does not help in case of international supply in determining whether it is inter or intra, because by default, as per section 7.2, all import of goods are interstate, and as per section 7.4, all import of services are interstate. So there is no need to take any help. As far as international supply is concerned, place of supply is not relevant. As far as my first point is concerned, that whether it is inter or intra, by default, every international supply is intra. But in case of domestic supply, it helps, because until and unless you know the place of supply, as per section 10 of the IGST Act, you cannot decide whether this supply is inter or intra. So I can say that, what can I say? That relevance for place of supply can be judged through 2 points. First, when this supply is domestic, I'm not using the word international, because in international, supplies are interstate. In domestic supply, if place of supply is not there, you cannot tell. So it tells me whether any supply is inter or intra. This is first relevance. Now second relevance. Second relevance, when you know that supply is inter or intra, then question arises, which government will get the revenue? Like I assumed an example where a businessman in Delhi has supplied 5 laptops to a person who is in Tamil Nadu, for simplicity. In reality, until unless you are taught the topic, location of supply and place of supply, you cannot judge exactly. So till today, I have not taught these two topics, location of supply and place of supply. So for simplicity, let me assume that Delhi is the location of supply. It is only for the purpose of simplicity. And for simplicity, let us assume that place of supply is Tamil Nadu. Only for the purpose of simplicity. As a layman, you can say these things, but not as an expert. If you are an expert in GST law, you will say that no, let me read first. So for simplicity, I am assuming these two things. Since these are two different states, and it is in domestic supply, then I will say that okay, the place of supply, okay, this supply is interstate. This is what my first answer will be. Now, if the value of 5 laptops is 5 lakhs, so which tax I will charge? Since it is interstate, I will charge IGST. Let us assume that 18%. Let us assume 18% is IGST 90. Now the question arises, as we know that IGST is 50-50. 50% center, 50% state. So 45,000 revenue will go to center, 45,000 to state. But again the question arises, which state? Will Delhi get the revenue or Tamil Nadu? Answer is Tamil Nadu. Now this is my second relevance. It not only first tell me whether the supply is inter or intra, the second relevance it tells me which state gets the revenue. And that is applicable for domestic as well as international. Second relevance is for domestic as well as international. Whether it is domestic supply or international supply, which state gets the revenue, that will be told only by place of supply. Which state will get the revenue? Who tells this? Or which concept will tell me? Place of supply. In this example, you can see carefully. And suppose had it been international supply, even had it been international, every international is subject to IGST by default. I know, but which state? Which state? For example, the goods are imported by a businessman in Delhi. If Delhi is the place of supply, then in international supply also Delhi government gets the revenue. Again, listen one thing. There are two relevances of place of supply. First, it tells me whether any domestic supply is inter or intra. International is by default inter. Now, once you have reached that stage where you know any supply is inter or intra, it does not matter now whether it is domestic or international. If you know what is intra and intra, then it does not matter. If you know that the supply is inter or intra, then it does not matter whether it is domestic or international. Second stage is which state gets the revenue. Now, when you are importing the goods, it doesn't mean that the entire revenue will be given to central government. When goods are imported, at somewhere these goods will be consumed also. So the goods where these will be consumed, that state, the states where these goods will be consumed, that state will ask 50% share. So in international supply also, place of supply helps me in telling which state gets the revenue. And I am assuming that because I have not taught you that in international supply, how do you determine place of supply? Again, for simplicity, you assume that if an importer from Delhi has imported some goods and place of supply is Delhi, for example, place of supply is Delhi, then Delhi government in this international supply will also get 50% share. 50 center, 50 Delhi. So place of supply in this way tells me two things. In domestic supply, it tells me inter or intra. Second, when you know that the supply is inter or intra, whether domestic or international, it also tells you which is that state which will get the revenue share. Please raise your hand if you have understood the relevance of place of supply. Otherwise, ask me the points. If you have understood the concept, please raise your hand. Otherwise, ask me the doubt. Okay, now let me discuss with you technical concept. How do you determine place of supply? So for the time being, the discussion was only to tell you the relevance, so that you know that it is one of the most relevant topic of GST. Now, technical discussion is now on place of supply. How do you determine place of supply? It is not so easy as it look as it is looked by everybody. It's not so easy. It is a little bit technical, but interesting, of course. Now, place of supply is also given in IGST Act, and there are 5 sections which deal with it: 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 of the IGST. 10 and 11, these talks about goods. 10 talks about domestic supply of goods, and 11 talks about international supply. Similarly, 12 and 13 talks about services. 12 talks about domestic supply of services, and 13 talks about international supply. 14 talks about OIDAR services. I will tell you this later on. It is online information and database access and retrieval services. I will tell you this later on. My concentration in today's discussion will be on domestic supply of goods. Now we have 2 subsections, section 10.1, 10.2. In this there are 5 clauses: 10.1A, 10.1B, 10.1C, 10.1D, 10.1E. So there are 5 different types of supply of goods which can happen. So don't you think that, yeah, it is an interesting point? Because can you think of these 5 supplies? What you normally would have thought that when someone supply any goods, so it's easy that what is the place of supply, but no. In reality, there are 5 different things which can happen. What can happen? Like you are traveling from Delhi to Nagaland. You are traveling from Delhi to Nagaland by air. And after 30 or 35 minutes of journey, you have asked the air hostess to bring 1 burger. So you are consuming the goods, or maybe you are consuming the services in this case, or not, or in through air also, in aeroplanes also. So you can purchase goods also. You can purchase the watch. There are some goods which are on sale while you are traveling. Now, do you know what is the place of supply? You boarded the flight from Delhi. The destination is Nagaland, and after 30 minutes, do you know on which state you are traveling? It's not so easy. When you are traveling through air, how do you know that below which state is going on? So the question arises: which state gets the revenue? Maybe when the flight will go from Delhi to Nagaland, it will cover so many states. It will cover Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal. It will also go over and above Bangladesh. Now, technically, it's not so easy to determine place of supply. So we have a separate clause for this. 10 subsection 1 clause E deals in such cases. When you consume the goods, when you purchase the goods, when the supply happens, when you are on a conveyance. When goods require movement, like purchasing the goods from Delhi, and these goods have to reach West Bengal. Now, in this case, goods require movement. I will apply 10, 1 closing. Then so many times goods are so huge that movement is not possible. Can you tell me any example where the supply of goods is so huge that movement of that finished product is not possible? Any example which can come in your mind where movement is not at all possible? Any example of any goods where you cannot move the goods? Anyone who can give me the example? कोई ऐसा गुड्स जो आपको याद आ रहा हो कि जिसमें मूवमेंट हो ही नहीं सकती है? एनी एग्जांपल?
So like
Yes,
the
yes, yes.
properties, buildings, like dealer make them and then supply them to the people.
Yeah, but that is sale of building is not under GST laws. Building is not a goods. Point clear?
Yes, sir.
So building is not a good. Yeah, of course. One building is covered in the definition under GST laws when till the completion certificate is obtained, construction of building is a part of GST, but that is treated as services, not goods. If you remember schedule 2, then under construction building on payment of EMIs is treated as services, not goods. Point clear or not?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so building cannot be covered in goods. This is sure. Another example where movement is not possible, it's impossible to move. Can you tell me any other example? Delhi Metro, underground metro. To build a tunnel, boring machines are installed by Delhi Metro Rail Corporation. Heavy machines, heavy boring machines. Tunnel can be made only by these machines. These machines have been imported from different countries and it's impossible to move these machines. These are very lengthy in size and very heavy. These have to be assembled at this site. So these tunnel machines, it's a good. Supplying of tunnel machine is a good, but movement is not possible. So there are so many supplies which are to be assembled at this site. So for this we have different provision. Similarly, let me show now the act and then I will simplify the clauses for you. First, let me show you what act says. So you can think, you can now see yourself that there are different ways and supply of goods is not so easy. It is having different compositions, you can say, or different types, you can say. In some goods, movement of goods is possible. In some goods, movement is not possible. Some goods are consumed when you are on board a conveyance, you are on board a truck, train, aeroplane, ship. So many things. So let me share with you the IGST first. Now see this. This is my IGST. Services on board. It is chapter 5 of IGST. I will show you section 10 for the time being. What it says now. Supply of goods other than supply of goods imported into or exported from India. That means section 10 talks about only domestic supply of goods. International is not covered here. What subsection 1 says? of supply of goods other than the supply of goods imported into or exported from India shall be as under. So there are 5 clauses, as you can see: clause A, clause B, clause C, clause D, and clause E. Then we have subsection 2. So let me first discuss only clause A. What it says: where the supply involves movement of goods, when it is necessary that goods are to be moved, then in this case what is the place of supply? So Act says whether by the supplier or the recipient or by any other person, when the goods require movement, the place of supply of such goods shall be the location of the goods at the time at which the movement of goods terminates for delivery to the recipient. Now let me discuss this with the help of an example. Now this is my first part of section 10 subsection 1. So let us start discussing now technically as an expert the topic of place of supply. So section 10, determination of place of supply of IGST. Determination of place of supply of domestic supply of goods in case of domestic supply of goods. So I'm discussing first point, section 10, subsection 1, clause A. When the goods require movement of goods, where it is necessary that movement is involved. In this case, what is the place of supply? It is the place where the movement of goods terminates for delivery to the recipient. Example: supplier Punjab, supplier Ludhiana, Punjab. Person Mr. K in Assam, Mr. X. Now Ludhiana is a great market of woolen items. So you can buy the wholesale product from Ludhiana, woolen. So Ludhiana is having a great market, a heavy market, a big market of woolen items, woolen hosiery, socks, sweaters, jackets, whatever. 50,000 jackets are being supplied at, for example, 500 rupees or for example 1000 rupees. Now, is it a good? Answer is yes, jacket is a good. What is the place of supply? This is the question. Now, this is my example 1. What is the place of supply? I will apply section 10 1A because this jacket movement goods require movement. The place of supply is where the movement of goods finally terminates for delivery. Now suppose goods are to be delivered in Assam itself. So the moment goods will reach here, Assam becomes the place of supply. And location of supplier, for simplicity, let me assume location of supplier is Punjab, place of supply Assam. It is a domestic supply. So one thing is sure that it is interstate. So this is first work which place of supply has done for me. It is interstate. Second work is what? It will tell me that Assam government will get the revenue. How much? Now, for example, the value is 5 crore, add IGST. If it is interested, I will add IGST. Let me assume 18%. So 90 lakh is IGST. Total 5 crore, 90 lakh is the point, and this out of 90 lakh, 45 lakh is center's share and 45 lakh is Assam's share. So this is the second work which place of supply has done for me. First it told me that the supply is interstate, and then it also tells me that Assam is the place of supply. I hope the point is clear, the example is clear. Second example.
Sir, excuse me.
Yes.
So, can you get to the previous slide once?
Yeah, already at the previous slide.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Example 2. Same case. Mr. X, Punjab. Now see, I am not concerned which city is that, because under GST the government is state government. So whether Punjab, Jalandhar, Hoshiarpur, okay, does not matter. Amritsar, city doesn't matter. Place means state. So Punjab, Mr. Y, Assam, same thing, jackets. So whatever is the point. But now goods. So my place of business is in West Bengal. My principal place of business is in West Bengal. So I might be registered in Assam, but my principal place of business is in West Bengal, and I'm saying that please deliver these goods at my West Bengal address. So can you tell me what is the place of supply? West Bengal. West Bengal. Point clear or no? Section 10, 1A. But still do remember that there are only two parties involved. Mr. X. There are no three parties for Mr. Y. Mr. Y has its own principal place of business in West Bengal. So there is no third party involved. Still, the party are two, Mr. X and Mr. Y. In this case, the principal place of business, the goods will be delivered at West Bengal, not at the state where I am registered. So as per section 10, 1A, the place of supply becomes West Bengal. Please raise your hand if 10, 1A is clear. Very good. Now next is little bit technical but very interesting. Very interesting. Now before showing next one, let me tell you when I can use or when I have to use next point, next clause 10(1)(b). B. Now in this case, what is happening? Now so many times what happens? For example, Mr. X, Punjab, and someone is in West Bengal, Mr. Y is in West Bengal. Now supplier is this person who is in Punjab, and this is a person who is ordering the goods. But suppose I will first receive the goods in West Bengal, and suppose I have my customer in Tamil Nadu. For example, I have my customer in Tamil Nadu, Mr. P. Now X does not know Mr. P, X knows Mr. Y, and Mr. Y knows Mr. P. But why now, as a businessman, Mr. Y, what I will do? Why will I first bring or ask for that order to come at my shop, and then it should go at Mr. P's shop. Why? To save my transportation, because this is the distance that, and transportation cost will increase if this is the distance. So I am saying directly to this person to supply the goods to Mr. P. You can see a huge transportation cost will be saved. And this is the normal thing in any business. This is the normal thing in any business. Mr. X does not know who Mr. P is. Mr. X says, on your instruction, Mr. X says to Mr. Y that on your instruction I am supplying the goods to Mr. P, but you have to give me the payment. That's it. I don't know who Mr. P is. So now who is the supplier? Mr. X. Who is the recipient? Mr. P. And this Y is not receiving the goods, ordering the goods only. Now for this I have 10(1)(b). Now let me first, I hope this example is clear that such things normally happen in a business. To save the transportation, maybe I can directly ask my supplier that you send the bill to me, but delivery, please pack the goods directly at Tamil Nadu's address so that I save some amount of transportation. That's it. Now, place of supply is not so easy to determine. Can you think logically what should be the place of supply? Can you think logically what should be the place of supply? Or can you tell me what is the difference between this example and previous example? Here also what is happening? Supplier is sending goods to Mr. Y. Want to send goods to Mr. Y in Assam, but Y says that I have another business in West Bengal, deliver the goods directly at West Bengal. So I think same circle is formed here, but still, can you sense the difference? Can anyone sense the difference in last example and this example? Can you sense the difference in last example and this example? Anyone? Anyone who can sense the difference? Now we have three parties. But in last example, places may be different, but parties are still two. This is one difference. Now, can you think logically what should be the place of supply? In the present example, so one difference is clear. In the last example and this example, you cannot compare these two examples. This example is different and this example is different. In this case, supplier from Punjab is supplying to Mr. Y directly, not in Assam but in West Bengal. But person is still Mr. Y. Here, the Punjab supplier is supplying not to Mr. Y in West Bengal but supplying to Mr. P in Tamil Nadu. So the persons are also different. Now, can you tell me logically what should be the place of supply? Logically, what should be the place of supply? Anyone who can tell? Should it be Tamil Nadu or Punjab or West Bengal or what? Anyone who can think logically, what should be the place of supply? No answer.
Sir, I think it's West Bengal.
What? West Bengal?
Yes, sir.
Not 100% correct answer, but technically, do you know two supplies are happening here? It's not a single supply. Two supplies are happening.
Sir, but it's just the order of Mr. Y to deliver the supply to Mr. P. So, how is it a supply, sir?
How?
Sir, it is just an order by Mr. Y to supply the goods to Mr. P.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, how can it be considered as a supply?
So if Mr. P doesn't give the money to Mr. X, then can Mr. X sue Mr. P or Mr. Y?
Mr. Y, I guess.
So of course, so it becomes a supply then. Now technically, why it is two supply? One supply is happening from Mr. X to Mr. Y. Delivery might be a different concept. and second supply is happening from Mr. Y to Mr. P. So technically Mr. Y is common. Supply is happening through these channels, this and then this. Delivery may be direct. Is the point clear? Kindly unmute and reply because I cannot see the raising hands right now because when the notepad is open I cannot see who has raised hands. Is the point clear? Delivery may be single, but technically there are two supplies which are happening at the same time. Unmute and reply please. X to Y and Y to P.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Now what section 10 subsection 1 clause B says? So now you have to see. So let me share with you the act. Now see carefully what section 10 subsection 1 clause B says. Where the goods are delivered by the supplier, in my case Punjab, where the goods are delivered by the supplier, in my case Punjab supplier, to a recipient or any other person. So who is the recipient? Tamil Nadu person. On the direction of a third person. Now who is this third person? Can you tell me who is this third person? Who is this third person in my example?
West Bengal.
Yes, very good. A person from West Bengal is this third person. Where the goods are delivered by the supplier to a recipient on the direction of third person, whether acting as an agent or otherwise. Now it does not matter whether this supplier is acting as the agent of this third person or otherwise, it does not matter. That means actually it does not matter in what capacity you are supplying. Before or during the movement of goods. Now these instructions have been given to the supplier when the goods were being loaded into the truck, when the truck was in Punjab, or maybe when the goods were moving from Punjab to Tamil Nadu during the movement, because it will take around 10 days to cover the distance or 9 days to cover the distance from Punjab to Tamil Nadu in a truck. So when the goods were moving in the truck, at that time the instructions were passed. Before or during movement, that is important, not after movement of goods has completed. Before or during, either by way of transfer of documents of title to the goods or otherwise. It does not matter. Actually, how you have transferred the goods to this Tamil Nadu person doesn't matter. It shall be deemed that this third person has received the goods. In reality, Tamil Nadu person has received the good, but Act says we will assume that this West Bengal person who has ordered the goods has received the goods, and the place of supply of such goods shall be the principal place of business of such person. So where the business of this third person is situated, that will become the place of supply. So by going by the language of the Act, I will say that the place of supply will be determined as per section 10 subsection 1 clause B, and it will tell that the place of supply in my example will be West Bengal and not Tamil Nadu. So the place of supply in my case will be West Bengal. Though the goods are delivered at Tamil Nadu, but in reality, who is ordering is having the final instruction. The person who has ordered the goods has only done so just to save the transportation cost. Otherwise, when you open this transaction, you will find that goods will go to West Bengal and are coming from West Bengal to Tamil Nadu. So technically, in reality, delivery may be directly at Tamil Nadu, but had there been no transportation cost involved, goods would have come to West Bengal and then to Tamil Nadu. On this basis, Act says the place of supply should be treated as the supply of ordering person, West Bengal, and it is section 10, 1 clause B. This is the point. This is the point. Another point. But don't you think that Tamil Nadu government will object? Don't you think that the Tamil Nadu government will object, because GST is a consumption based taxation, and Tamil Nadu government will say that goods are being consumed in my state, why will I not get the revenue? So for this, the point which you must remember is that 10 subsection 1 clause B only catch first supply. Another supply which is by default from Y to P, in this case also we will determine the place of supply, and in that case the place of supply becomes Tamil Nadu, and now it is being determined as per section 10 subsection 1 clause A, when the place of supply is the place where movement of goods terminates for delivery. Now it is the place where movement of goods terminates for delivery to the recipient. Terminates for delivery to the recipient. So by default, when you have to apply section 10 subsection 1 clause B, you have to also apply section 10 subsection 1 clause A for remaining leg of that supply. Whenever you will apply section 10 subsection 1 clause B, always there will be two supplies happening. 10 1B talks about only for first supply, first or second, whatever is the case, but it only catches one supply. For second supply within section 10 subsection 1 clause B, you also need to take the help of application of section 10 subsection 1 clause A. It might look technical but logical, of course. Any doubt, you please ask, otherwise raise your hand. If you have understood this point, please raise your hand. It might look a little bit technical but very interesting and logical also, that both the governments are getting the revenue, West Bengal as well as Tamil Nadu. Just for the transportation cost, a person may directly send the goods, but government says you may save your transportation cost, but why will we lose our tax revenue? So since you are registered and your place of business is in West Bengal, you should pay tax here also. The Tamil Nadu government is also logical in asking that you should pay tax here also, because goods are being finally consumed here. Please raise your hand if the concept is clear. Now one more thing. Within this, if I make a small assumption, and that small assumption is, if you remember the act, the word used was before or during the movement. The word used was before or during the movement of goods. That means these instructions were being given by the Y. Y has given these instructions to X when the goods were either in Punjab or en route. But suppose goods have reached Tamil Nadu because of some reason. Maybe this road was blocked, some unrest was going on, whatever is the issue. Maybe by mistake the goods have reached Tamil Nadu, and then Y said that, okay, since by mistake you have reached Tamil Nadu, then please deliver at my customer's place, Mr. P's place. So in that case, what is happening now? So in that case, now what is happening? That I am passing the instruction. Y is giving the instruction to the supplier after goods have reached. After goods have reached. It was not given before movement or at the time of movement. It was given after the goods have reached. Then section 10 subsection 1 clause B is not applicable. Then I need to apply 10(1)(a), and with this the place of supply will only be Tamil Nadu and not West Bengal. This is the point. In 10B you must not forget that 10(1)(b), you must not forget that the instructions must be passed before starting the journey or during the movement of goods. After the goods are finally reached at any state, and they in that state, now you say to the supplier that deliver the goods at that state itself. Then government says 10 Act says 10(1)(b) is not applicable. Then you apply, of course, 10(1)(a) because goods were actually required the movement. So whenever goods require movement, then you simply apply 10(1)(a). The place of supply will be the place where goods have finally been delivered. These are the 2 points which you should not forget. You have to revise these slides and listen to this lecture again in case you face any problem. And still, if you have any problem, please raise your hand. Not any problem. In case the concept is clear, please raise your hand. In case the concept is clear, please raise your hand. In 10(1)(b), always there will be 2 sections. When you apply 10(1)(b), by default you have to apply 10(1)(a) also. So goodbye for now, and in the next lecture we will cover remaining concepts of supply goods. Goodbye.